The last paragraph of Middlemarch is a kind of elaboration of Dorothea Brooke's name as a river and a gift from God. Her finely touched spirit had still its fine issues. Sort of in the past tense, had, could also be in the present in the sense that its issues, its consequences might still remain. It's talking about the consequence of the past. And the word still indicates persistence. Spent itself in channels which had no great name on the earth. So what a way to end, a massive novel, speaking of meager representation in language. But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. It's such a wonderfully, perfectly ambiguous formulation. What's not calculable is not the quantity of her effect on the good of the world. What's incalculable is the subtlety of her effect. Eliot is saying Dorothea's effect is something that's sublime, that defies clear representation in language or empirical measurement. The most we could do is even imagine what such an effect would mean. It's like the squirrel's heartbeat, or the roar on the other side of silence. But imagining teaches us something about how that effect works. Branches that might diffuse and influence our lives at a higher, finer grain than we're conscious of. I think this is another version of Dorothea's point that if you must feel with me or else you'll never know. It's about emotional intelligence. We can be instructed, educated emotionally, sentimentally, in ways that exceed our capacity to consciously, intellectually understand. So basically, amounts to a kind of mood, feelings that you have absorbed, that have diffused within you in the course of this book. Wordsworth speaks similarly of feelings of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on the best portion of a good man's life, his little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. So you see, the suggestion, it's certainly very romantic, but I think it's not implausible if you think about it for a sec, that what's best about us is a capacity for kindness and love that is spontaneous, which is to say that it is not intentional. It's not something we understand, but that comes intuitively out of our feeling, out of mood, emotional disposition. Eliot alludes to Tintern Abbey here in a way that seems to foreshadow Zadie Smith's experience at Tintern Abbey. She describes an attunement of learning to hear Joni Mitchell, in particular the River Song.
I'm so hard to handle, I'm selfish and I'm sad. Now I gone and lost the best baby that I ever had. Oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I wish I had a river so long I would teach my feet to fly. Oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I made my baby say goodbye.
All these ways in which it's disqualified for narrative, unhistoric, unvisited, hidden life. These are unstoried, unnarrated, forgotten history's losers, history's bystanders, marginalized, those that weren't recorded or weren't narrated. but they're recovered by number, half owing to the number. She's resorting to this language of calculation, even while acknowledging that a precise calculation isn't possible. And it's telling that the one other time, the one of two times in Middlemarch that she uses this formulation, half owing, is love story that also concludes Book 8, Middlemarch proper, between Fred and Mary. Some years after his marriage, he told Mary that his happiness was half owing to Fairbrother. Again, it suggests a formal pattern that supersedes traditional narratives, especially traditional love narratives. This third party intervening in the love story of Fred and Mary is half responsible for its success. Eliot is showing how there's a kind of implicit probabilistic pattern that dictates what is explicitly narrated. It's what makes the conclusion of the novel a happy end, and are so beautifully narrated, are so romantic. We at the same time, we have the narrator kind of coming in and saying, yeah, but statistically it's not quite as it seems. Of course, this is how Eliot characterizes her mode of historical narrative in terms of scientific experiments, examining how the mysterious mixture behaves under the varying experiments of time. That's very stark language, right? I mean, behavior applies to intentional, meaningful narratives. Love stories involve behavior, but she's using it here in an extremely impersonal scientific way that, you can talk about particles behaving in a certain, or chemicals behaving in a certain way in varying experiments. Right from the first sentence, we were just looking at the last sentence, and also right from the first sentence, she's focusing on this tension between what we can narrate and what we can just examine without describing, human purpose. Formal patterns, mixtures, varying over time. Chapter 15, Eliot describes Lydgate's ambitions in quite similar terms. So it seemed to Lydgate that a change in the units was the most direct mode of changing the numbers. He meant to be a unit who'd make a certain amount of difference towards that spreading change, that diffusion, which would one day tell appreciably upon the averages. It's very precisely worded, I think, which would one day tell. There would be an explicit story will eventually emerge. So history really progresses. The decisive changes, the crucial changes, are implicit changes in the units, the terms of the narrative. Once the terms have been made explicit in a way, before the story even begins, the story's over, because we've decided what matters. It's in changing our sense of what matters that historical change really happens. Eliot makes a similar point with her allegory of the scratched mirror at the beginning of chapter 27. So that it's as if she's describing two levels of narrative. There's the level of narrative that you consciously see, the distribution of scratches that appear to your eyes in the light of your perspective or your candle illuminating. But then there's the actually decisive implicit narrative, which is the movement of the candle, which is the movement of your perspective, illuminating different patterns of accidents. That's where the story is originally kind of dictated. So, and in this case, remember that it seems as if at first she's mocking at Rosamond. The scratches are events, the candle is the egoism of any person now absent. Miss Vincy, for example. Might seem at first blush that she's mocking Rosamond for her egotism, because that's often the case in this novel. The point is that this applies to everybody. Everybody is egotistical in their selective consciousness of particular patterns of accidents in the world. No one can not be egotistical in that selective consciousness, right? Allegory of the Scratched Mirror kind of dismissively correlates egoism with Rosamond and thereby tempts the reader with the very flattery that it's describing. That's why this complexly ironic narrative style is really important, because it keeps the reader off balance. The allegory tempts the reader with the self-flattering illusion that this is an egotism that only supreme narcissists like Rosie are guilty of, rather than everybody. Whereas this same insight is really crucial to Dorothea's growth in the novel, the really key insight she makes regarding her misguided passion for Casaubon. When she begins to see that she'd been under a wild illusion and expecting a response to her feeling for Mr. Casaubon. And the waking presentiment that there might be a sad consciousness in his life, which made as great a need on his side as on her own. She's making exactly this awareness that he has his own candle illuminating its own pattern of details in the world. He has his own center of self, an equivalent center of self, whence the lights and shadows must always fall with a certain difference. So she's precisely making this same insight that Eliot later allegorizes with the Scratched Mirror. But what's crucial here, I think, to notice, what Neil Hertz emphasizes especially, is not just knowing that other people have different perspectives. Everybody has their own concentric circle of illumination. What matters here is that it's not just that she knows it, that she feels it, that she conceives it with that distinction, which is no longer reflection but feeling. An idea wrought back to the directness of sense, like the solidity of objects. This is an insight that's been wrought back into this directness of sense, like the solidity of objects. It's become a part of the world. It's an insight that is restructuring the material world around her and her sensuous experience and emotional experience. That's to say, she's integrated this complexity into a new higher order picture of her own concentric pattern. Like now, awareness of the egotism of others written into the solidity of objects, into the directness of her sense experience itself. Isn't that interesting? Her very material perception of the world now, these other perspectives, is something that she feels now, not just abstractly knows. So the way that Neil Hertz puts it on page 30 is, Dorothea's exemplary action, the acknowledgement of an irreducible difference between persons, is it accompanied by and accomplished in the reduction of another sort of difference, that between reflection and feeling, idea and sense. And Hertz emphasizes that what the difference in Casaubon that Dorothea is recognizing here is precisely his inability to do this, to turn a thought into a feeling. And interesting, Eliot describes this in very personal terms. And this is Hertz's larger argument in recognizing Casaubon, is that Casaubon represents a kind of self-recognition of a certain aspect of George Eliot herself, which she describes here, this over-intellectualizing, this kind of wanting to hold everything in thought. This potential is described here. I feel very sorry for him. So in other words, I feel sorry for this part of myself. It's an uneasy lot at best, to be present at this great spectacle of life and never to be liberated from a small, hungry, shivering self, but always to be scholarly and uninspired, ambitious and timid, scrupulous and dim-sighted. So again, like with Rosie, important temptation to avoid here, assume that the principal point concerns fault with Casaubon rather than the larger pattern, tension, dialectic that's being described here. Just like the allegory of the scratched mirror is not just meant to describe a problem with Rosie. On the contrary, thinking it's just a problem with Rosie is missing the point. And that's why Eliot's compassion here, her empathy for Casaubon, matters. She's speaking as much from herself as for Casaubon when she says it's an uneasy lot, this bind that imprisons Casaubon from life, from feeling, from the intelligence of felt experience and emotional intelligence. When Dorothea says that Casaubon has a equivalent center of self, and she's recognizing his particular illuminating candle and concentric pattern of accidents, this is the center that she's becoming aware of. This double bind, being scrupulous and dim-sighted, that's the equivalent center of self that she's learning now to feel. So this is quite an internal experience of Dorothea. She's distinguishing something within herself as much as she's distinguishing herself from Casaubon. So I think Eliot's being very rigorously consistent in acknowledging that there's a certain level of inescapable egotism, but then on the other hand, we grow out of moral stupidity by learning to perceive, learning to feel with the distinctness of sense, the solidity of objects, a more complex world beyond what we understand, beyond what we can think. Becoming wrought back into the directness of sense is an endless movement. We can see the patterns, the concentric patterns of accidents in the world, but recognizing this endless interplay of different perspectives means continuously folding in new levels of complexity in the manner of these fractals, I think. That's just what fractals describe as well. This being wrought back, being curving backwards upon oneself to register higher and higher levels of complexity. And that movement is another way of, turning that intelligence into feeling. Feeling informed by intelligence is movement, emotion. That's why emotion describes a kind of movement. It's intelligence turned into an active knowledge of the world, and an awareness of the world that's also action in the world. This activity of weaving, not just the static image of the web as a static object, but weaving as an ongoing fractal activity, perpetually moving back on itself in its engagement of an environment too complex to be objectified. I think this is evoked really powerfully in the first sentence of At the Fish Houses. This interplay of netting the net. Where does the activity end? And the object of the activity, the results, like the issues of the brook, the branching of the river. Where does that activity end and the result begin? That's to say, how do we reduce that to a cause and effect? A bishop uses a sensuous imagery of the cold, darkness, the penetrating smell that makes one's eyes water. The subject and objects dissolve into one another. Although it is a cold evening, down by one of the fish houses, an old man sits netting, his net in the gloaming, almost invisible, a dark purple-brown, and his shuttle worn and polished. It's like, who is it he that is almost invisible, or his net? the worn and polished instrument of his work. The work becomes embedded in the instrument like the invisible gloaming. In the gloaming, almost invisible. It's sort of redundant, like the darkness, invisible darkness. The poem proceeds like a fractal, trying to go deeper and deeper and penetrating into this interweaving activity. She is drawn toward the ocean. The movement of the waves dramatizes a kind of dialogue between feeling and knowing. If you should dip your hand in, your wrist would ache immediately. Your bones would begin to ache and your hands would burn, as if water were a transmutation of fire that feeds on stones and burns with a dark gray flame. Adrienne Rich's Diving into the Wreck explores this submerging into the body, wrought into the direct, sensuous experience of things. In more explicitly political terms, submerging in damage, the damage of words and maps, conceptual binaries, like gender binaries, that abstract an experience of a new body, new environment, new environmental awareness. This is the place, I'm here, a new sense of time and space, new body, new genders. The mermaid whose dark hair streams black, the merman in his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck. We dive into the hold. I am she, I am he. This rebirth is correlated by Adrienne Rich with mythology. Mythology mediates this new embodiment in time and place. Gillian Beer in Darwin's Plots makes a similar point about myths, and this is on page 162 and 163. Myths, the religious and proto-scientific perceptions of different cultures, survive because they tell stories about human or quasi-human figures which satisfy the need for recurrence. Cultures are defined by their myths, but myths outlive the culture which produced them. Casaubon's dry collation of myth, arranged according to the authenticity of their period, is set against George Eliot's own manifold, free-ranging invocation of diverse mythology within the book. Casaubon cannot accept the protean nature of myth, because renewal and embodiment are beyond his imaginative grasp. Dorothea may be a poem to Ladislaw. She is never, in any sense, myth to Casaubon. So love is correlated with the ability to read reality as myth, read myth into reality. In At the Fish Houses, this rebirth, this transfiguration is invoked by kind of an inverted sensuality, that what's cold becomes hot, and an inversion of subjects and objects. The objective world, the inhuman world, becomes regenerative. The ocean gives voice, has a mouth that gives voice. Its breaths nurture forever, flowing and drawn. Regenerative rhythm. The meaning of words becomes subordinate to the rhythm and alliteration. Flowing and flown sound like synonyms. Flow and fly sound like synonyms. Draws us into, again, a hallucination of burning when we're actually freezing, and flying when we're actually flowing. It's like what we imagine knowledge to be: dark, salt, clear, moving, utterly free, drawn from the cold, hard mouth of the world, derived from the rocky breasts forever, flowing and drawn, and since our knowledge is historical, flowing and flown. It's a good way of understanding what Emily Dickinson meant by slant. In Eliot's terms, the idea being wrought back into the directness of sense, contorting meanings to align with concrete material sensuous experience in the world, and then newly inform the world, newly constitute, transfigure, regenerate. So you see these poems are filled with contradiction. The meanings of words are getting deconstructed. Heavenly hurt. So none may teach it, it's like none may teach it, but any may teach it. An imperial affliction, scent of the air, sort of nowhere and everywhere, afflicting and heavenly. There's no scar, there's no discrete sign, but it's the source of the meanings. Landscape and shadows holding their breath, the pent-up vitality and energy of the world, or the distance on the look of death, the inertia, the lack of animation. These sort of basic coordinates of reality of the world are inscribed as moods as much as meanings. They're evoked by the difference, conflicts among meanings. That's what she gets at in Tell All the Truth but Tell It Slant. Success in circuit lies, circuitousness, truth and lying, success in circuit. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. Meaning is wrought back into the directness of sense here by way of different invocations of momentum and movement. One kind of temporal progression where the children are surprised by the lightning and then subsequently eased by explanation. But then she describes the truth must dazzle gradually or every man be blind. Like the dazzle accumulates toward truth. So these circuits of movement, circuits of time, Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes likewise inscribe in the environmental moods and rhythms, experience of social injustice. What happens to a dream deferred? What happens to, a promise of justice left unfulfilled? Makes it concrete and all these really vivid environmental phenomena. Raisin drying up in the sun, a sore festering and then running, stinking like rotten meat, crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet, or sagging like a heavy load, or does it explode? These are so evocative once you start to think of them. They're all environmentally interactive. All these other analogies are kind of passive, effects that are suffered. An explosion is sort of a retaliation, recoil, active, a reconfiguration of the environment. Terroristic connotations, but also utopian connotations of regeneration, transfiguring of a corrupt, morbid, dying environment. Through all these different analogies, Hughes evokes the subject as the consequence of a mood, of an environmental interaction, a response to an environmental predicament. Likewise, in Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, it's all about the we as a consequence of its own activity. A we that is produced by what we do, how we describe what we do. Self-enactment almost has the rhythm of pool players striking the ball in succession. And all these activities are transgressive one way or another. They're defined by the way in which they defy convention and make poetry of that defiance. That's, I think, what's key. The we follows not just from the activity, but from the way the activity is described, is named. We real cool. That we is a consequence, it's not just something there. It's a consequence of saying ourselves. We create ourselves through how we say ourselves. So there's a pretty evident echo, I think, Wordsworth's We Are Seven. What's at stake is the effective meaning, counting seven, what it means to count. And in both cases, it's resisting a kind of throwaway dismissal. What is dismissed as trash, as dead. Both poems are asking us if we can reanimate that, we can recognize, count life in what's dismissed as dead. So reading, the act of reading becomes potential regeneration, rebirth, or complicity in a dismissal of life, discounting of life. This is finally what I think Eliot's suggesting about Dorothea's incalculably diffusive effects on the world, is that they're regenerating, they're creating a new form of subjectivity, new form of society. To rewrite the environment is to rewrite one's place within it, rewrite how that environment is happening, unfolding historically. It's the old man netting his net. Reconceive the weaving of the world is to create a new form of regeneration. I think that's what Zadie Smith is interested in her description of sort of learning to hear, learning to appreciate Joni Mitchell. It's like a rebirth. You become a different person through the different art you consume, the different perspectives transmitted by the different kinds of communication that you participate in. So she cites Seneca, we're in the habit of saying that it's not in our power to choose the parents who are allotted to us. They were given to us by chance. But we can choose whose children we'd like to be. I think that's really powerful. And I think that's what's finally at stake in these marriage plots in general. So, but Middlemarch in particular, and its kind of radical conception of a new form of society, choosing whose children we are. Dorothea and Lattice are children of this new kind of anonymous democratic experiment. They've cut the cord, the umbilical cord, with the aristocratic convention, repetition of feudal forms of life. What that means, as Dorothea says, it's unclear. It can only be evoked sort of in generic mythological terms, negative terms. You have to feel with me, she tells Celia, or else you'll never know. That's what's reproduced now. To say it's a question of reading, this regeneration as a matter of reading, is to make urgent, to make reading about reading the present, submerging in a way our meanings in the here and now. The crucial moment of Frankenstein, where the creature confronts DeLacy, and DeLacy can hear in his words that the creature is sincere. There's something in your words that convinces me you're sincere. And at that moment, we readers of Frankenstein, our perspective overlaps with DeLacy's toward the creature, toward a creature embodied in words. And so our relationship to the outside world, how we conceive of the social world that we belong to or don't belong to, is at stake, is up in the air for us to decide in that moment. And likewise, this becomes an issue also for Dorothea, when she's despairing about feeling disillusioned about Will, thinking that he'd acted inappropriately with Rosamund Lydgate. She, in this moment of despair, discovers a chance to act, a possibility of rebirth. What should I do? How should I act now, this very day? What literature can do is give us a way of conceiving and framing the moment of now, a portal for submerging our meanings into the concrete world, enacting them in the concrete world, making them count. Counting, after all, is another way of talking about rhythm, the ongoing experience of time in the present. Gillian Beer talks about the dual meanings of relation in this sense, that to relate a story is to become related with. A relation of siblings, of community, of personhood is constituted by the relation of story. Relation is something you do. It's something you do, but it's also the product of that activity, just like we were saying about we. Dorothea was undergoing a metamorphosis in which memory would not adjust itself to the stirring of new organs. So we reconstitute ourselves in time in the way we narrate ourselves in time. It's a great speech which Martin Luther King Jr. talks about two kinds of time, sort of complacent indifference to the clock time ticking away, or transformative engagement of time as kind of self-narration.
But for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so we must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right.
Kendrick Lamar contrasts two different kinds of time in a similar way. This sort of skit at the end of the album version of I addresses some people that are like fighting in the audience, and seems to be contrasting like the time of music with the time of fighting, and then imprisonment. And then he starts talking about trash talk, sort of recalling that idea of throwing words away, treating people, discounting people by discounting language, and enchanting language, respectful language, magical language, royalty, kind of creating community through how we talk about community, relating by way of how we relate, creating new kinds of we through the time of language, of music and poetry.
It's not my time, killing music. Not my time, man. We can say that's for the streets. We can say that's for the kids, bro. 2015, it's tired of playing victim, dog. This ain't trying to play victim. How many we done lost? How many? Yeah, how many we lost? No, for real, answer the question. How many we done lost, bro? This year alone. Exactly, so we ain't got time to waste time, man. Gotta make time, bro. The judge make time. You know that. The judge make time, right? The judge make time, so it shouldn't be for us to come out here and appreciate the little bit of life we got left, dog. On the dead homies, Charlie P, you know that, bro. You know that. Right, it's Mando. Right, it's Mando. Now, and I say this because I love you, man. I love all my niggas, bro. Enough said. Enough said that we're gonna get back to the show and move on, because that's petty. Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check. We're gonna do some acapella before we get back to all my. Listen to this. I promised Dave I never used the phrase. He said, think about what you're saying. No better than Samuel on the Django. No better than a white man with slave boats. Sound like I needed some soul searching. My pops gave me some game in real person. Retraced my steps on what they never taught me. Did my homework fast before government caught me. So I'ma dedicate this one verse to Oprah on how the infamous sensitive N-word control us. So many artists gave her an explanation to hold us. Well, this is my explanation straight from Ethiopia. Negus. Definition, royalty. King royalty. Wait, listen. Negus. Description, black emperor, king ruler. Now let me finish. The history books overlooked the word and hide it. America tried to make it to a house divided. The homies don't recognize we've been using it wrong. So I'ma break it down and put my game in a song. Negus. Say it with me. Or say no more. Black stars can come and get me. Take it from Oprah Winfrey. Tell her she right on time. Kendrick Lamar, by far, realest niggas alive.
His poems are all about finding a kind of community in the world, by finding a kind of text in the world, a verse, finding the world reanimated by a refrain that bespeaks a we, a community, and recreates the world as nothing other than the act of this saying. It's recreating what's otherwise discounted as trash. What's trash is made into the occasion of a creative time in which the community, is a consequence of the experience of music itself. I think you can look at the seminal hip-hop song, The Message. It's a kind of updating of Philip Larkin's This Be the Verse. They're both about being fucked, you know. It makes me wonder why I keep from going under. Like, I don't know why. What keeps me from going under is the message itself, is saying the message, like the verse. You're fucked. I'm telling you, I'm fucking you up by telling you how fucked you are. But it's a verse. Verse means turning around, transformation, turning the story, flipping the script, and reproducing in a new way, the reproduction of music. That's what's redemptive, and we real cool. It's there's something to the verse that is not reducible to the narrative of dying soon, that this rebellion can be lived through the poem. The story of the poem is not the end of the story.
My son said, Daddy, I don't want to go to school because the teacher's a jerk. He must think I'm a fool. And all the kids smoke reefer. I think it'd be cheaper if I just got a job, learn to be a street sweeper. I dance to the beat, shuffle my feet, wear a shirt and tie, and run with the creeps. Because it's all about money, ain't a damn thing funny. You got to have a con in this land of milk and honey. They pushed that girl in front of the train, took her to the doctor, sewed her arm on again. Stabbed that man right in his heart. Gave him a transplant for a brand new start. I can't walk through the park cause it's crazy after dark. Keep my hand on my gun cause they got me on the run. I feel like an outlaw, broke my last glass jaw. Hear them say, you want some more? Living on a seesaw. Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. Say what? It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
It's interesting in that Grandmaster Flash lyric how it describes something like a Frankenstein creature sewing the arm back on again and putting in a new heart. It's like reconstructing the body, and that's what I'm trying to say, you know, about poetry, music, various communications media are technologies of regeneration. I think that's a basic Frankenstein motif, that we recreate ourselves through these stories of recreation. And it's especially vivid in the case of hip-hop, you know, that it is music designed for public performance, for transfiguring the public space. The message by Grandmaster Flash is about urban blight, the blighting of urban space and the prospects of life in the urban context. The lack of a coherent narrative to live by makes me wonder how I keep from going under. There is no narrative, but there's the message, there is the song to sing, which becomes its own purpose. That's really what I'm suggesting. And what I meant to suggest about all these poems of lack of purpose, words thrown away, but rediscovering a purpose through the message, the activity of mediation itself, the verse itself. Likewise here in Ladislaw's lovesick lyric that he improvises on the way to church, meaningless and it's about cheapness. What frugal cheer my love doth feed upon. Like hip-hop, it's the improvisation suited to the occasion, but in its cheapness, it transforms the world, offers us a different kind of time, a different way of experiencing time, thereby a different world. It's a reincarnation, filling the air with the spirit, abundant and uncertain promises. That's what music does. That's what poetry does. So I'm going to end by showing you this clip from a great documentary about the beginning of hip-hop and graffiti in the Bronx, New York, called Star Wars. Art form, graffiti or hip-hop that transforms the public space and creates a new we. Naming oneself, appealing for social recognition, for one's name, but more than that, a certain way of naming, a mediation of the name, an encoding of the name, creating a new medium for self-naming. Just like I'm saying about these poems, all these different ways of saying we, recreating a we by mediating it in new ways. And this clip, it features this amazing guy. He's sort of a Frankenstein creature himself, lost an arm in an electrocution accident, a graffiti artist. And there's just a great sequence here in which the song, the message, is quoted by the guys in the documentary, but then the song comes up on the soundtrack, and it becomes sort of a music video. And just think it's a beautiful kind of image of the interplay of art and life, and marching through the middle, the mediation of who we are and what we are. It seemed like a good note to end on.
What's up, man? You know, I'm chillin', man. Slick Rick. In the Asian Bay.
For about 2.5 years, I was upstate, from like beginning of 1970 to 72.
What's up? Yeah, what's up?
When I came home, I ain't know nothing about no writing, no graffiti, cause I wasn't about it.
All right. You know it. What's up, man?
So when I got home, I seen writing on the train. I said, what's this stuff here, you know? These niggas doing their names big. I said, let me do one at least, you know, cause I was, you know, down with art already. And I did me a piece, just, you know, for people in general to get to know who I am. I said, ooh, that look all right. Well, I'm gonna go every Sunday now. Next thing I know, I started getting better and better. And as I realized I knew to get better, I said, oh man, I'm gonna bring out the computer rock. And then that's when I really got loose, cause then niggas are saying, yo, who's that guy? Then one day, these news reporter people was on the train station. We was going by and we seen them. We seen them filming our whole car. We went up to him, and I remember I said, yo, who you think probably done that right there? You know, just to be curious to see what they say. And he said, I don't know, but whoever done it, that's remarkable talent, you know? I ain't never seen nothing like this before. I said, if I told you I did it, would you believe me? He said, I don't know. I can't say, but I believe so, because you don't never know what you can believe these days. So I said, well, I did. And they said, I don't believe that. You only got one arm. I said, that don't mean nothing. I do things that people don't realize I can do with this, being that I'm like this, And then he said, I hear you then, Sonny. And then I said, well, I ain't no Sonny now. I just was asking a question, so, so that's all I wanted to know, to see how your feelings was about it.
Do you want to dance? What's up? Get some candy? Huh? Ain't get nothing? Wait up. Get some candy, man. You ain't got no change? Oh. Hey, check it out. What you know? Check it out. Where that nigga at, man? Yeah, I can dig it. We going on the other side, right? Word. Oh, wow, check it out, wow. The Beachmaster, do you want to swing? Here, look. Are you willing to take a chance? Instead of that eye. Yeah, word, look at that eagle, word. That's the, look at the eyes, like this eye. You know where he got that from, right? Von Gold and who? Frank Rosetta. Beachmaster. Where the letters is breaking up. Epic Adventures of a New Kind of Hero. That's what we're going to be, the fresh extraterrestrial brothers. You know what I'm saying? Extraterrestrial. Knowing we the best. You know what I'm saying? It's the Desi and the KCK, the D5. We gonna rock the place. And if you're based in the place, you will get disgraced because we are the crew. We got the place. Rock socket, rock it in the pocket. A socket, rock it in the pocket. Work that girl front of the train. Took it to the doctor, so I'm on again. Stabbed that man right in his heart. Gave him a transplant for a brand new start. Can't cut through the park.
Cause it's crazy after dark. Keep my hand on my gun, cause they got me on the run. I feel like an outlaw. Broke my last glass jaw. Hear them say, you want some more? Living on a seesaw. Everywhere, people pissing on the stage, you know they just don't care. I can't take the smell, can't take the noise. Got no money to move out, I guess I got no choice. Rats in the front room, roaches in the back, junkies in the alley with the baseball bat. I tried to get away, but I couldn't get far, cause a man with a touch of repossessed my car. Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head.
Graffiti, man. Niggas say it played out, niggas say this, niggas say that. But it's gonna keep going on, But look, I might be old and quit, but you coming up, younger niggas is coming up, it's gonna keep going and keep going, But you gonna be a king soon too,